I was in a relationship, I don't think my ex wanted me to go into some of the things that she wanted to go into. It'd be embarrassing because I don't know
Yeah,
anything about it. And then we went to a
exactly.
baseball game and she started calling the pitchers the windup, the roundup. And that was kind of embarrassing for me. I'm like, you got to take that Dodger hat off. Okay. Like this is posing is not working.
You don't have to answer this, but what is your personality type? I'm interested to know.
Yeah, I'm a baboon, and I always say
Okay.
that, and I'm proud to say the baboon just because a lot of people hate their animal type because they're like, I don't like my animal, and a
Right,
baboon is
right.
not the most flattering animal. So I'm like, hey, man, mine is not even great. So like, don't even think like I was making this out so that I could have a cool one. If that
Right.
was the case, I would have put myself as the fox because
Yeah.
foxes love to be foxes. And at the end of the day, like I think you can tell, like certain, especially some of the animals, it's very clear what the archetype is. I think if
Yes.
you say, oh, that person's a fox personality type, you're gonna be like, oh, are they selling me something? Because
Yeah.
they're great at selling them stuff.
Welcome back to Rise and Tell with Shikha. I am Shikha Singh, your host and author. I have got something special to share. My brand new book, Unburnable Ambition: How Overachievers Win Without Burning Out. This book is for all of us who dream big but refuse to let burnout be the price. Head to shikhasingh.com/unburnable ambition and sign up today. Now let's dive into today's episode. Our guest for today is Eric G. Eric says he has a baboon personality and he has actually personality typed over 50,000 people during his career. Eric is the author of the book, The Power of Personality. It's the culmination of decades of research and application. The main takeaway is that Eric says all our relationships with others can only be as healthy as our relationships to ourselves, which is why you need to know what your personality type is. So, if you're intrigued to know more about personality traits, animal types, and how it's going to help you as a person and in your career, check out this episode. So there you go, everybody. Today we have with us Eric G. Eric, welcome to our show. So happy to have you on our show today.
I'm happy to be here. I'm so glad to talk to you and I'm excited.
Thank you. All right, we'll just dive right in. I am intrigued about your background. So tell me, how did you move from screenwriting and English literature to getting into personality traits and personality types, Eric?
It's a long time coming. When I was in high school, I don't want to say I was one of those weird kids. I probably felt weirder than I appeared. So maybe that's a lucky thing for me that I was able to assimilate fairly easily. But deep down inside, I was like, I'm not really into all this stuff that a lot of people are into. And by stuff, I mean like getting good grades and all this very linear approach to life in general. I was more like, well, I'm still trying to figure stuff out. It took me years later to realize that though my fellow classmates also didn't know what they were doing, but they were
Mm,
very good at just appearing like they did, and maybe they thought they did. And so I studied personality typing, all to say that I started studying personality types because I felt a little different. And I studied that for quite a while, but my academic background is in screenwriting. But
yeah.
then after college, I started my own education company, and that's when got back into the personality typing. That was when I started realizing, wow, I can really use some of the knowledge I have
Right.
to help the students. We would serve about 1,000 students a year, and I could teach my teachers this methodology. And then as I taught them that, I started developing my own methodology based on kind of the practical application and research, in terms of how many case studies we had. And
Right.
yeah, that's how I kind of transferred in, even though anyone who's read the book knows that I write in a very, I won't say flippant, that's kind of a pejorative, but I write in a very fun, let's say, style. And I think
Nice.
that derives from my screenwriting background and creative writing background.
Love it. Love it. That's so interesting. Okay. So you mentioned that you built your own education company and now you want your teachers to implement what you found or what you developed. So tell me, when did that idea get into your brain or your mind? When you're like, oh, you know what? I think I should start my own company and start using personality types and traits.
I had always worked with kids. This is random, but I was an assistant basketball or a basketball coach, a youth basketball coach.
Ooh.
I was a assistant scoutmaster, and I always did a lot of volunteering. And I know I always use the personality typing in a very casual way in terms of understanding people and being able to work with them. And then I started tutoring offhand for a company. And as I was tutoring for that company, I started to realize that, there are a lot of problems with the way that we educate. And there's nothing wrong with educators, but I would say the system and the structure in which we educate is not necessarily the best. So I started doing my own thing with this company, just because obviously I was a tutor, so I was kind of like off to the side and they really couldn't control that. And then I started realizing, you know what, if I'm going to do my own thing, I might as well just start my own company. And
Mm.
I did. And that's when it took me a little bit, like maybe a year or two to realize, oh, maybe I should start implementing my personality typing on a larger basis in
Right.
terms of teaching my teachers. I didn't do that for like the first year or two. And then I started doing it because obviously it was clearly helpful for me and people really were into it. And what I found was a lot of the parents that were my teachers were really like, they took to it really quickly, right? They would say like, oh, they start realizing why they like their son more than their daughter or their daughter more than their son. And it's nothing personal. They love them
Right.
equally.
Right.
But, sometimes this one kid just pisses them off, and it was
Right.
basically based on different personality types. So
Right. Right. Okay. So give me one example of the kind of different personality types that you've experienced with your company and the people who've come to you for different sorts of things. I know you've also given a lot of talks and you've held a lot of workshops on leadership and for offices, but we'll get to that later. But for now, I'm just interested. What are your most favorite types of personalities and what you've experienced?
I don't want to say favorites because that's going to get me in trouble. Of course, I would say that my favorite type is my own personality. No, yeah, I think we all have to like ourselves
Yeah.
best. But I think in general, more helpful things that I've found is that this is going to get wonky really fast. I split people into 4 different personality packs.
Okay.
And within those 4 packs, there are 4 animal types, right? So that makes 16. But the most common packs, I call them gatherers and hunters. And gatherers make up about half the population. So about half the population are going to have a same core
Right.
value. And I mention that because they may make up half the population, but they probably make up about 80% of educators.
Okay.
Definitely at the elementary school level, because their number one priority is safety and security and creating a safe space. And I think that's super important when we're dealing, especially with K through 8 education. However, since they make about 80% of the population or of the teaching population, but not all their students are going to be that way. And so I always said, look, if you have a hunter student, hunters learn by excitement and they're not really caring about the rules. They will bend the rules and push them as much as they can and get away with whatever they can. So I would tell parents who are gatherers or teachers who are gatherers, if you tell a hunter kid, if you go into that cookie jar and take a cookie, I'm going to slap you. And the funny thing is, the hunter's not going to go, oh, okay. They're not going to read that as, oh, you're my parent, I should listen to you because you clearly don't want me to go into the cookie jar.
Right.
But they'll read it as, how hard is that slap? Is it worth the cookie? Is it a really good cookie? Because maybe I'll get the cookie and get the slap and it'll be okay. And I think for gatherers and teachers in general, they just don't understand that. They're just like, wait, what? Like, no, I'm the authority. You're supposed to listen. I'm trying to tell you, do not take that and grab that. But hunters are very different. They make about a third of the population. They're the kids who are like grabbing things and throwing things and not standing still. And I think it's good to understand that contrast because it happens all the time. And I think if you don't understand that as an educator, then you're definitely not going to instruct that particular student in the best way for them individually to succeed.
Wow, this is so amazing. I wish more people knew about this, Eric, because I've experienced that. My sister and I went to the same school. We had almost the same teachers from the first grade till the 10th grade. But both of us were totally different. And so my mom would always struggle and she would say, I hate the parent teacher meeting things that happen. And she would go, why is it that I always get scared when I have to meet, your sister's teachers? And they're the same. Like I would have the exact same teacher and then 2 years later, my sister would have the exact same teacher and they would often compare. And my mom's like, I'm doing the exact same thing at home. I'm not doing anything wrong. So why is this happening? I so wish, like, if my sister was listening to this episode, she would definitely be on your side and she would say, why didn't you come up with this 20 years ago?
Was she more of I won't say mischievous, but did she kind of bend the rules a little bit or did she kind of want to do her own thing? Was that
Yes.
her?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Even now, I feel like she's that way because we'll tell her, hey, you know what? We've been there, we've done that. Why don't you try this? We know that this works. She'll be like, no, but I don't want to do it.
Right. And
Just
who
find
knows, it
out.
might not work for her, right? Like,
Yeah.
like that might be in her mind. If she is a hunter, hunters value excitement.
Yeah.
So you can imagine if a gatherer values safety and security and then one values excitement, that's like a huge contrast, right? Like those are 2 very different values. The funny thing is that's like the most common coupling. You find a lot of like couples that are one's a gatherer, one's a hunter, because I think deep down inside we know that we need to complement each other and balance each other out. And I think that's a great thing about understanding about personality is that it's okay to be different. We actually are attracted to differences. Unfortunately, when we get into relationships, sometimes that attraction becomes, okay, now that we're together, now I'm going to make them like me.
Yeah, yeah.
right? And then you grow up hating them because you turn them into something that you were not attracted to in the first place because,
Exactly.
but anyway.
Exactly. Wow, that's a brilliant, brilliant point because I've seen that in so many friends and so many coworkers too. I love this, but my wife doesn't. And even if it's like an activity or anything, and we're talking about certain things, you're like, oh, I wish my husband would come with me to this. Like, you don't have to. You have to, accept the fact that you both can have different hobbies, can like different things. You just don't have to be everywhere, pretend that you both love the same thing. Yeah,
Right,
I
exactly. It's also embarrassing. Like, dude, I remember when I was in a relationship, I don't think my ex wanted me to go into some of the things that she wanted to go into. It'd be embarrassing because I don't know
yeah,
anything about it. And then we went to a
exactly.
baseball game and she started calling the pitchers the windup, the roundup. And that was kind of embarrassing for me. I'm like, you gotta take that Dodger hat off, okay? Like, this is posing is not working.
Yeah, this is great. Okay, Eric. So you've mentioned, and actually, no, you haven't mentioned, but I did read in your profile that you talk about the importance of personality typing with careers. So
Hmm.
tell us, since most of our listeners and viewers are around the age where they're trying to figure out where they fit, tell us how important it is for us to know what our personality type is and how is it going to help us with our careers.
Yeah, that's a great question. I work with a lot of students at different ages, and sometimes I work with, 40-year-old people who are reanalyzing or reassessing their life choices, right? And
Right.
I think at the end of the day, obviously, we all need to support ourselves and to make money. But I do think that, especially for college educated kids who are coming out, there's a certain sense of like there are jobs there. Now, might not necessarily be the jobs that we want,
Yeah.
but I think what's most important is figuring out what our values are. What do we really value? Because for a job, if you want to be doing it for quite a while, you're going to have to really enjoy it and
Right.
value like where it's going.
Yeah.
And I think understanding your personality type will really help you do that. For example, I have a student who I think when I first met her, she's actually my favorite student. I'll say that. I really shouldn't, and she was a type where I could totally tell, she said, "Oh, I want to be a vet." And I was like, "Oh, you're not going to be a vet." She's like, "Why would you say that?" I'm like, "First off, you don't like school." And she's like, "Oh, wait, do you have to go to school to be a vet?" I'm like, "Yes, let me count the years, the future years." She's like, "Oh my God, 15 more years of school." I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's what you," but really, I think it was just her parents or grandparents telling her. She probably said, "I like dogs." And her parents were like, "Oh, great,
Right,
be a vet."
right, right.
And knowing that she was, I'm going to say this animal type, and people and listeners are not going to know, but she was a dolphin personality type. And
Okay.
dolphins are part of the shaman pack. Shamans value self knowledge, and they
Right.
tend to be very good with people. They tend to be in HR positions, they tend to be in communal leadership positions, therapy, counseling. And so she asked me, really, like, when she realized she didn't want to be a vet, what did she want to do or what should she do? I'm like, well, your personality type is into like leading people and being very communicative. And it
Right.
turns out, of course, she was in student government. She really enjoyed that. She had no problem going in front of people and giving speeches. So I'm like, yeah,
Nice.
maybe something towards that realm versus this other realm.
Nice, nice, nice. Okay, interesting. But I think I can argue on both sides though, because once you're out of college and the bills start coming in, I feel like most of us have no other option but to just go with whatever's being offered to us. But it also comes back to bite us at some point in time because yes, we did take one sort of job because at that time it made sense, it was paying the bills, etc. But then after a certain time you're like, oh, do I really enjoy this? Am I really made for this? I know I can do so much better. So okay, I think I get that. Like initially, it's not everybody has the privilege of
Mhm.
sitting back thinking about, what my personality type is and what jobs are out there that I would be great at. But yeah, I think after a certain while, you can sit down, think about it, and then figure out and then go that way.
Yeah, it's more about what you like doing, right? Like what you like doing, you're going to do more, and likelihood if you do it more, you're going to be better at it. And I think in general, I would not necessarily look at it in terms of jobs, but personality types help us figuring out what our skill sets are and what skills that we like to
Mm,
use, and
yeah.
that eventually will lead you to like a job because there be multiple jobs within a certain field that like let's say you're a personality type that loves excitement, like a hunter, right? Hunters don't generally love school. And by school, I mean like sitting there, having to read books and,
Right.
take a test. That's just not how they love to learn. The
Right.
irony is most hunters make great surgeons
Mm,
because when you think about it, a surgery is not some intellectual, Like, you don't really need a huge intellectual capacity to be a surgeon,
Right.
right? But by the way, what you need are great hands,
Yeah.
great hand and eye coordination,
Yes.
but there's a lot of schooling to get to that point, right? So I think in general, like when hunters find themselves, they can be doctors, and even though they don't like school,
Right.
but they are definitely, if I were to talk to a hunter in medical school, I could definitely give them recommendations on what specializations they might want to do, right? They're not necessarily going to want like the 9 to 5 job. That might not be
Yeah.
super exciting. So they might not want to be a dermatologist or an ophthalmologist, even though most doctors tend to go that way because they're like, oh yeah, this is like safe, secure, 9 to 5,
Yeah.
no crazy hours, but a hunter, if you like excitement, be an ER doctor, orthopedics,
Right.
surgery. Those are things that I think would be more appealing. So I think within even individual sectors, you can find positions that are going to be more appealing to you based on your personality type.
Nice. Love it. Okay. So again, Eric, you don't have to answer this, but what is your personality type? I'm interested to know.
Oh, I'm a baboon. And I always say
Okay.
that, and I'm proud to say the baboon just because a lot of people hate their animal type because they're like, I don't like my animal, and a
Right,
baboon is
right.
not the most flattering animal. So I'm like, hey, man, mine is not even great. So like, don't even think like I was making this out so that I could have a cool one. If that
Right.
was the case, I would have put myself as the fox because
Yeah.
foxes love to be foxes. And at the end of the day, like I think you can tell, like certain, especially some of the animals, it's very clear what the archetype is. I think if
Yes.
you say, oh, that person's a fox personality type, you're gonna be like, oh, are they selling me something? Because
Yeah.
they're great at selling them stuff. So baboons are a part of the shaman pack, as I
Mm.
mentioned before with my student who is a member of the shaman pack, but a
Right.
different animal. Shamans value self-knowledge. So we have a goal of discovering ourselves. We're often not necessarily, I always say like shamans do not have a midlife crisis because our whole life is a midlife crisis because we're constantly
Oh,
questioning what we do. Now,
nice.
that's a huge disadvantage, especially when you're younger, because nothing's certain for us, and
Yeah.
we kind of like envy fellow students who seem to have everything figured out, even though you're right, you figure out they don't have it figured out.
Right.
But the nice thing is, when it comes to like when we're in our 40s, we're not going to have that moment where like, oh my God, I've done everything in my life that's been terrible, and I haven't even thought about it because generally we would have been loathing our life from our teens. So we've put in the work. So that's
Nice.
my type. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I remember all of us at workplace had to take this certain assessment, and then you were given a result, and then you fall in, I think, same thing, 4 quadrants, but it was different. And this was like both the leaders had to take it and also the team members had to take it. And then when the HR team was briefing us about the results, they even shared, like, if I was a team leader, they shared with me the results of my teammates and my team members so that we could figure out a way to lead all of these people who have different results. So, what has been your experience, Eric? What would you suggest that as team leaders or as leaders, what is something that people can be aware of when they're trying to manage a certain group of people or manage a project which has different team members from different backgrounds and different experiences?
Well, definitely knowing someone's personality type. I think if you hone in on the fact that if this person is like this animal type, they
Right.
will value this more so than maybe you would, especially if it's a different personality type. I think that's important because I think when it comes to dealing with differences, we often accept differences, but the differences we accept are very superficial. Like they're very like, oh, that person's more organized and I'm more flexible, or that person's more outgoing and I'm more introverted. I
Yeah.
put quotes because I don't really love extroversion, introversion as a trait description. But then we assume that the other person across from us values the same things. We're like, oh yeah, we value the same things. We just go about it differently. I'm like, no, no, no. We actually value very different things. And so when you're valuing the person across from you values something very different than you, I think it's super important to be aware of that and to not take it personal. Because I think sometimes we take it personal and then we make character judgments, right? We're like, oh, well,
Yeah.
that person's not a good person because they don't value their family. It's like,
Right.
well, maybe, but when's the last time you heard about Einstein's family? Right? Like, I'm always like, yeah, do you know about it? And Einstein had a daughter. Maybe he wasn't the greatest dad, but we don't hear about it because that just wasn't his priority. His priority
Right.
was clearly information and like delving into that. And you know what? It helped families all over history and the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
So,
Agree.
yeah, that'd be the one big thing I would say. Like, I always think like a friend of mine, sorry, I'm gonna have another story, but a friend of
That's
mine
fine.
she was we're having lunch and then her boss called her and was like, hey, like, I'd like to meet. It was a Sunday. And she's like,
Right.
oh my gosh, like, I gotta meet my boss. I'm like, really? Like on a Sunday? She's like, yeah, I think he wants to go over like what we did in the meeting, da 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 da, like this project that we're working on. I'm like, oh, okay, like, so how long are you gonna take? She's like, at least an hour. So I'm like cooking and stuff, and she came back 10 minutes later. And she's like, and because I was like, that seems odd. I don't think he's like that, but okay. She comes back. She's like, oh, he's like, he didn't want to talk about the project. I'm like, yeah, I didn't figure. Like with his personality, he's kind of like a family man. He wouldn't like. She's like, yeah, all he did was he just wanted me to meet his family because they were here in the neighborhood because they were going down to the
Oh.
beach. And I'm like, yeah, that's funny because that's totally what I would have thought because he's kind of more of a gatherer. He's safety security. He's more
Mm.
family oriented. So Sunday is a day with the family. So if he's gonna call you, it's to meet his family. And she was like, oh gosh, what a waste of time. I'm like, well, I hope you didn't tell him that. But that would really offend people, right? If they heard someone say, oh, that was a waste of time meeting his family. And she just had a very different mentality. She was very work, work, work. And I don't
Mm,
think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's just when we identify those things, especially definitely within our family and the people close to us, because that'll help our
right.
relationships, especially work relationships. When we do that, it definitely increases productivity and morale.
Correct. I agree. Wow. Great explanation, Eric. Love it. Love it. But you mentioned you don't really like the extrovert, introvert, the way they've categorized that. Tell me more about it. Why?
Yeah, I just feel like one because there's so many books on introverts power and all that stuff. Just because introverts obviously they definitely don't get as much acclaim. So then of course, who's gonna
Yeah.
not what introvert is not gonna love a book that says that? But my problem is it's contextual
Mm.
because when I used to go over this and tell people about this back in my younger days when I was using other people's material, people would come back and say, yeah, but I'm like introverted in this situation, but extroverted in this situation. And I always be like, oh, yeah, I can't argue that. That's not wrong. And so
Right.
then when I started developing my own methodology, I started realizing, yeah, it is more context. Like, I think it just depends on what we value. If you value something strongly, then you're going to be a lot more outgoing when it comes to that. Like one of the animal types I have is a bear. Bears value family. They're so quiet and gentle and kind of like I think of like Superman, right?
Yeah.
Superman's a bear personality type, but he does value the people closest to him. And
Yeah.
when it comes to like protecting them, he is not introverted. He is an extrovert. Like he is like outgoing. He will get
Yeah.
out there and put himself out there. So I think that's generally why I
Mhm.
don't like introversion, extroversion is because I don't think it's particularly accurate.
Wow, what a wonderful example. That was a great example, Eric. I love it.
I love
You,
culture.
yeah, you're making everything sound so easy and so simple. Because when I was looking at your profile and when I read a little bit about your book and everything that you've done, I was thinking that, oh, this is going to be like a very serious, complex discussion about the different personality typings and everything. But you're making it so simple and easy. So I think that's a great trait that one can have. So kudos.
Yeah, I really dislike theory. That's the reason why maybe I wasn't a really good student. I would have been definitely maybe on your sister's, like where my parents were like, they enjoy going to parent teacher conference only to hear how bad I was doing so then they could throw it back on my face. See, we told you you're doing terrible. Look, because I think when we sometimes theory and intellectualism, which is great and it's good to like think about things, but I think sometimes it can be very almost elitist and restrictive
Yeah,
when I think we have all this information in our brains because we've all met hundreds of thousands of people probably in our lives, or at least thousands of people in our lives.
right.
Now, we don't necessarily know what to do with that information, but it's still in us. And I think for hopefully my book was geared towards helping people tap into their own intuition and maybe they can start identifying things that they've seen and start going, oh, that's why that person was like that. And that's why I didn't like that. Or that's why I did like that. And why I really get along with this person. So hopefully
Ah.
it's more inclusive.
Nice, nice. Okay, so tell me, I have two questions for you, but I'll go with this one first. When you were writing your book or that whole process of publishing your book, when you went through the final manuscript, what was your most favorite chapter or paragraph that you were proud of?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. I'd probably say at the way end of this is going to be random because it's at the end of the preface. I
Okay.
think I put like something called like a Utopia 7-point creed. And that was kind
Mhm.
of me playing around with the idea of creed. Like
Right,
I'm
right.
not a huge fan of like certainty. So I love like kind of like satirizing it a little bit. But I actually am very proud of that section just because I think it did hit some of the points that I really want to hit and people to understand in a way
Right.
that was very tight. That's a screenwriting term, like very like yeah, like very concise and I think funny and at least it packed a punch. At least when I read it, it packed a punch. Maybe not when other people read it, but that would probably be my favorite part. That section.
Nice, nice. Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out real fast. So I'm gonna buy your book and check it out, and I'll let you know what I think of it.
Well, and you have to let me guess your animal type because then you can read the book and then figure out whether I was right or not. And
Oh,
I always
do
say
it.
if I was right, tell me, and if I was wrong, don't tell me.
Okay.
Because
All right.
then it'll just leave me thinking that I was right, I think. No, that doesn't even logically make sense because then I would know. Never mind.
Wait, you want to guess it now, or you want to?
I could. Let me ask a couple questions. I mean, you said a couple things where like, okay, I'm getting a contrast here with your sisters. That's good. I think when we contrast ourselves with people, that's the best, right? And my book does use a lot of juxtapositions where it's
Okay.
like, okay, because at the end of the day, people are going to be very similar to us, but there might be some differences,
Yes.
and that is going to make you different from the next person or the person next to you. Obviously, you said like a very clear difference between you and your sister, right? So I'm assuming that you were a good student
I
and
was.
the teachers were always said great things. I would say one of the other things, one of my pet peeves is when people go, oh, I don't know if anyone said, oh, it's because, are you the oldest or just
I am.
older? Yeah, sometimes I think people do, oh, the oldest sibling is kind of like this. I'm like, well, not always. I think unless the oldest sibling fits a certain pattern, like a certain personality type, then they're going to be like a certain way. But just from personal experience, my sister was not like the premier student, you know. She was the one who was getting me in trouble, and then she would throw me under the bus. Let me ask you this: at your worst, if friends were to say, "Oh yeah, I don't like her when she's like this," what would the this be?
Not agreeing to some of the common societal terms. For example, people just don't like it when I say anything in terms of women empowerment, or I'm like, no, but why does she have to do it just because she's a woman? But and people are trying to explain to me, people are changing, it's still people are getting used to it, but I'm like sitting there, I'm like, no, that is wrong. I think that is one thing that people would say, I don't like the way she.
So wait, so you're saying that what would you? So you're saying like you're not following the standard, or you are following the standard, or what would?
So like I'm not following the standard. I have a very difficult time when people say, "Oh, you have to do this just because you're a woman," or "You
Oh, okay.
have to do this just because you're married."
Okay.
So
No,
not
that's actually
following
really
that.
no, that's actually really because I was between a couple. Sorry, I'm in my head.
Okay.
I know people can't look into my head because and you don't want to look into my head because there's a lot of weird stuff there. But like I'm just comparing this, and that actually was super helpful because I was either going Gather or Smith, and I think you might be a Smith because Smiths don't love. I won't say don't love social structure, but they don't love following social structure just because. They
Right.
don't love following norms just because. There has to be a logical reason for it. So they
Right.
would be the most likely to go. You also might not be like, well, I'm not going to treat this person differently because she's a woman and I'm a woman. I'm going to treat them equally, like very like neutral. Yeah. So, but you seem very structured and organized, and you're a good student. Would you say that? Okay. Last question. At your worst, would someone say that you're cold and calculating, or would they say you are bossy?
Bossy.
Okay. Well, that's easy then. You're a killer whale. Would your sister say, "Oh God, she's so bossy. Like she's always trying to boss me around. And all I want to do is have fun."
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say the animal type, you would be a Smith. Smiths prioritize information.
Okay.
That's their core value. So they can get them in a lot of trouble. Like that friend I was mentioning to you, she was also killer whale. So information, work, that's very important because that's how they measure their impact on the world. Is what are they doing? And then they're a little bit more aggressive than a spider. Spider was the other one I was leaning towards. So it's like a killer whale would be like Hermione Granger in Harry Potter. She's a killer whale. That's a nice one. There's also some bad ones I can think of in my head, but like they're always like the domineering, like Macbeth. Macbeth is a killer whale too. So
Right.
yeah.
Nice. Wow. Okay, now I'm really curious because now I want to read and I get back to you if it was right.
Yeah, tell me if that was accurate or not.
But that was spot on though. Like I'm surprised that you just asked a few questions and then you already gave me an answer in like less than 5 minutes, which tells me that you've done a lot in this field and your experience is speaking for itself. So that's awesome, Eric.
And I always think it's for me I'm a shaman, right? So shamans love self-knowledge and they also love learning about people because in their self-knowledge, right? It's not like we don't like to ask questions like, what did you eat for lunch yesterday? That's not the most interesting. But if someone said what they ate, we'd be like, oh, like, what do you like about that? Do you like trying different foods? Do you not like trying different foods? Because that's always fun. So for me, I'm always doing it because I think I do things because they're fun. And so hopefully I was accurate though. We'll see.
Okay, I'll let you know for sure. Okay, Eric, my last question is, let's say you are categorizing most of us as certain animal types, correct? Now, let's say obviously in the real world, there are certain kinds of people with certain personality types that you just cannot get along with. It could be anything, like a simple thing of theirs or something that they've been doing constantly for the last X amount of years, and you're like, I just don't want to deal with it. and they're not my type. But let's say you're in an office setup, or you're working on a project together, or you're related to this kind of person. What suggestion would you give now that you've learned so many different people, worked with them, personality types, everything? What is that one or two tips or suggestions that you would give for people like us where we just don't get along with certain kind of personality types?
That's a great question. I think the first one is to be able to determine the difference between character and personality. Because I do think like every personality type can go bad, right? Everyone has
Right.
their flaws. And I think so, like, let's say just because a stag personality type's flaw is that they can be a bit fascist and really bossy, but bossy in like the worst possible way.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they're all like that. It just means that they're
Right.
worse, they're like that. And that would be a type that I probably would not get along with particularly well when they're at their worst. When they're at their worst, it's tricky because that is definitely a character flaw. So it's almost like saying, how do you get along with a bad person?
Yeah.
You know? And I would recommend interacting with them as little as possible and appreciating how they can help you and not trying to think that anything you do is going to change them.
Right.
And not, most importantly, not letting anything they say or do change you.
Yeah.
I think in that moment, I definitely am more of like abstain from contact if possible. I don't think we can change people. Like now, if it isn't a character thing, if it's just like a different personality type, like a stag that is just structured and maybe inflexible, but not necessarily like my mom's a stag. She was a school principal where personality types did not necessarily blend, but that doesn't necessarily mean I don't appreciate her strengths and values in what she does.
Right.
It's not like I try to avoid her. So, I think the first step is figuring out whether it's a character flaw or it's just personality differences. And if it's a character flaw, try to avoid them. And if it's a personality difference, try to understand them.
Nice. What a wonderful advice. I love it. That was like spot on. Thank you. Before we end the show, is there anything that you would like to share with our audience, Eric?
If anyone wants to take a test online, now I'm always wary about recommending tests, but I do have a test on my website. Well, I have two websites because one's a WordPress site, but it's on the WordPress site. It's on utopiaproject.com. If people want to take the test and figure out what animal they are, they can. Though I would recommend, because it's only a cookie cutter test, that they buy the book and learn more, because that'll be a little bit more accurate. But if they want to just test it out and see, they can always take the test and see if they like it.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you for spending your time with us today. And thanks for all the valuable tips that you shared with us. That was awesome. Thanks for being on our show, Eric.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in for today's episode of Rise and Tell with Sheekha. My book, Unburnable Ambition, is all about how to chase your biggest goals without losing yourself to burnout. You can now sign up at shekhasingh.com/unburnable ambition. Until next time, keep growing, keep glowing, and be yourself, and keep your ambition unburnable. Thank you.